During World War II, the Allies faced a chilling dilemma. German U-boats were wreaking havoc on supply convoys in the Atlantic, and conventional aircraft carriers were too few and too fragile to patrol the vast ocean. So the British government decided it was time for something bold, something unconventional, something frozen. This is the unbelievable story of Project Habakkuk, the plan to build a massive, unsinkable aircraft carrier out of ice. It all began in 1942 when a British scientist named Geoffrey Pike proposed one of the strangest military ideas of the 20th century. Faced with steel shortages and the pressing need for more carriers, Pike wondered, what if they could use a material found everywhere, water, but not just regular ice? He suggested using a new material he called pykrete, a mix of 14% wood pulp and 86% water, frozen together. Unlike ordinary ice, pykrete was strong, almost as tough as concrete. It could even stop bullets. And best of all, it melted very slowly. With Winston Churchill's backing, the British launched Project Habakkuk, named after a biblical prophet known for his bold visions. And bold this was. The blueprint? A 2,000-foot long, 100-foot thick, floating runway. Essentially a city-sized iceberg, hollowed out and packed with refrigeration tubes to keep it frozen in the middle of the ocean. It would be unsinkable, self-repairing, and large enough to carry dozens of aircraft. The Allies were intrigued, so they tested a prototype in a frozen lake in Alberta, Canada. There, engineers built a 60-foot model of the ice ship to test pykrete's durability. To their amazement, it held together, or even in warm weather. Bullets barely made a dent. When torched with fire, the material just sizzled and steamed, but didn't melt through. It looked promising. But as they moved toward full-scale construction, the cracks began to show, both figuratively and literally. First, the refrigeration system needed to keep the ship frozen 24/7 would require an enormous amount of energy, even in cold waters. Second, it turned out that pykrete warped over time, slowly bending under its own weight. So the carrier wouldn't just float, it would sag, twist, and eventually collapse without constant maintenance. And perhaps the biggest problem of all, by the time the tests were in full swing, the Allies had already gained air superiority in the Atlantic. New long-range bombers, better radar, and more escort carriers meant that the ice ship simply wasn't needed anymore. So in 1943, Project Habakkuk was quietly abandoned. The model in Canada eventually melted, and Geoffrey Pike's vision faded into obscurity. But the idea, being as wild as it was, left a mark on military history. It showed how far people were willing to go in a time of desperation, how creativity and desperation can spark some of the most imaginative inventions ever dreamed up, even if they never leave the drawing board. Today, all that remains of Project Habakkuk are declassified documents, a few faded photos, and a story that sounds like it came straight from a sci-fi novel, but is entirely true. In the end, Project Habakkuk reminds us that history isn't just made of battles and treaties, it's also made of imagination, experiments, and the icy edges of possibility. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this strange story from history, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another episode of Untold History in 5.